Throughout this course, we're going to be looking at how to solve different types of problems using mathematics. And one of the things we have to talk about when solving problems is assumptions that we make when solving a problem. So I'd like you to consider this question. How many people across the world are actively using their phone at a given moment? Or, in other words, how many people are glancing at their phone right now? To answer this question, we need to know two things, or we need to do two things. First of all, we need research. There are certain values that we just have to look up in order to answer a problem like this. The other thing we need are assumptions. And these are two different parts of the problem-solving process, and we're going to talk about their differences now. Some information needed to solve a problem needs to be researched, which means we need to look up real values. So for this problem, don't assume how many people live in the world. Look it up. That's a value that we can just Google very quickly. Don't assume how many people have cell phones. Look it up. There's no, that's a very quick way to really ruin a good solution, is to assume something that you could have just looked up the value to. And then don't assume how much time people spend on their phones each day. If you and your friends spend 8 hours a day on your phone because you watch so many YouTube videos, that doesn't mean that that reflects the average across the world. So someone out there's probably done that research before, and they've figured out how often people are looking at their phones or how much time they're spending on their phones. So don't assume something like that. So this brings us to assumptions. When do we make assumptions? When it comes to answering the question, some information does need to be assumed. So for example, when I did some research here, I went to TechCrunch.com and found that the average US consumer spends 5 hours per day on their smartphone. So an assumption that I might make, so now that I've done a little research, I might assume that this stat applies to every smartphone user in the world. That's an assumption. Is it a good assumption? That's where things become questionable again. Well, according to the Economic Times, Indians spend 3 hours per day on smartphones. So, do I want to apply the 5 hours per day that Americans spend on their smartphones to people living in India who number way more than Americans? Probably not. So that's one assumption, but there are some other assumptions we need to make just so that this question can be easily answered. This question, in any given question, you'll sort of have some parameters. In this one, we're telling you that it's meant to be answered pretty quickly, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes of research and calculating to come up with an answer, or maybe 20 minutes. And so we need to make some assumptions that do make our solution manageable. So one important one here is to assume phones are spread equally around the globe. And the reason for that is that, there's a lot of people in China, India, and Indonesia. Those are 3 of the top 4 most populated countries on the planet. But it really complicates our problem if we consider, densities of people on Earth. And so we have to make an assumption that of all 7.7 billion people on Earth, that they're spread equally around the planet. It just makes our lives easier, and it makes the problem actually something that we can calculate in our limited time span. Another thing we need to assume is that smartphones make up the large majority of phone usage. Because when we think about this problem, what we're really interested in is how many people are glancing at their phone or looking at their phone. So we're going to assume that most of that time is due to smartphones and not older mobile phones. And it's just, again, one of those things that's going to simplify our problem.